The first time Talia Reeves noticed the alien, he was sitting alone in the observatory deck of Arcturus Station. While other Vexari gathered in their characteristic tight-knit clusters, their iridescent scales catching the light of distant stars, this one remained isolated, his dull gray-green hide a stark contrast to the vibrant blues and purples of his species. Talia's attention lingered on him longer than was probably polite. As the station's senior xenobiologist, she'd spent 3 years studying the Vexari since first contact, but their social dynamics still fascinated her. They were communal to an almost hive-like degree. Seeing one voluntarily separated was unusual enough to merit a note in her research journal. "I wouldn't bother with that one," said a voice beside her. Commander Nathaniel Park slid into the seat next to hers, his gaze following her line of sight. "That's Krell. Bit of an anomaly among his kind." "How so?" Talia asked, unable to mask her professional curiosity. "Orphan. Parents died under classified circumstances when he was young. Been raised in various Vexari communal groups, but never quite accepted. They call him Ervik, untouchable." Nathaniel shrugged. "The Vexari attaché explained it to me once. Something about his bloodline being tainted. Their species places enormous importance on lineage and genetic purity." Talia frowned. "That seems contrary to their technological advancement. Genetic discrimination is hardly the mark of an evolved society. Says the human," Nathaniel replied with a wry smile. "We've barely understood a fraction of their cultural complexities. Ambassador Trell advised minimal interaction with Krell. Apparently, humans showing him preference could harm our diplomatic standing. So we're supposed to participate in his ostracism?" Talia felt a flare of indignation. "That's barbaric." "It's complicated," Nathaniel sighed, rising from his seat. "Just remember, there's more at stake than one lonely alien. The Vexari mining agreements have saved Earth's industrial sector. We need their helium-3. Talia nodded absently, but as Nathaniel departed, her attention returned to the solitary figure. She'd dedicated her career to understanding alien societies, not reinforcing their prejudices. The next day, Talia deliberately positioned herself in the research laboratory where Krell worked as a technical assistant. Unlike most Vexari, who served in administrative or diplomatic roles, he performed menial tasks, another sign of his low status. "Excuse me," she said, approaching his workstation. "I'm Dr. Talia Reeves. I need assistance interpreting these Vexari biochemical markers." Krell's head frills flattened in surprise, clearly unaccustomed to direct address from humans of rank. His voice, when he spoke, was softer than typical Vexari vocalizations. "The biochemical analysis program would be more efficient than my assistance, Dr. Reeves." "Perhaps," she replied, "but I prefer collaboration with living beings over programs. Would you mind?" His compound eyes studied her face, searching for mockery or ulterior motives. Finding none, he nodded slowly. Over the next 3 hours, Talia discovered that Krell possessed remarkable insight into xenobiology. His understanding of both Vexari and human physiological systems exceeded what his position would suggest. When she mentioned this, his frills darkened, the Vexari equivalent of embarrassment. "I study independently," he explained. "It is important to understand differences between species." "Why aren't you in a scientific role, then?" she asked. "My genetics make me unsuitable for advancement," he said simply, without self-pity. "It is our way." As the station's day cycle dimmed to artificial night, Talia found herself watching Krell leave the laboratory. Other Vexari moved aside as he passed, maintaining a precise distance, not obviously hostile, but unmistakably deliberate. That night, ignoring Nathaniel's warnings, she accessed Krell's file in the station's database. Most information was restricted, but his basic profile revealed something fascinating. Unlike purebred Vexari, whose lifespans averaged 60 Earth years, Krell's projected longevity was nearly double. Whatever made him untouchable had also made him biologically exceptional. Talia closed the file, her scientific mind racing with questions. What genetic difference could cause both extended longevity and social rejection? And why was such information classified? She made a decision then, one that would alter her career trajectory and change two species' understanding of each other. She would uncover the truth about Krell, regardless of diplomatic consequences. "You're making a mistake, Talia," Dr. Evangeline Foster warned, her eyes darting nervously around the mess hall. "The Vexari have strict protocols about their social hierarchies. Getting involved with an Urvik could jeopardize your position here." Talia speared a piece of synthesized protein on her fork, unperturbed. "I'm not getting involved. I'm conducting supplementary research. Research that conveniently centers around the one Vexari no one will miss if you offend him." Evangeline's eyebrow arched skeptically. "The ambassador's aide already asked me why you've been spending time with Krell. They're monitoring who speaks to him." Talia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's climate controls. "That's not social hierarchy, that's surveillance." "It's their way," Evangeline shrugged. "Just be careful. Your career is dedicated to understanding alien species," Talia finished firmly. "And right now, I don't understand why an entire race would shun one of their own based on parentage." As Evangeline departed with a resigned sigh, Talia noticed Krell entering the mess hall. The customary buffer of empty space formed around him as he collected his meal, a nutrient solution specifically formulated for Vexari physiology. Without hesitation, she rose and approached his isolated table. "May I join you?" she asked, ignoring the sudden silence that fell over the nearby tables. Krell's head frills quivered, a sign of confusion or distress, she wasn't sure which. "Dr. Reeves, this will not improve your standing with my people." "I'm more concerned with my standing as a scientist," she replied, sitting down. "And scientifically speaking, isolation is rarely beneficial for social species." A sound emerged from Krell that her translator didn't catch, perhaps a Vexari expression without human equivalent. "You're either very brave or very foolish." "I've been called worse," she smiled. "Tell me about yourself, Krell. Not the technical assistant, you." The conversation that followed was halting at first. Krell seemed unaccustomed to personal questions. Gradually, he revealed fragments of a childhood spent being transferred between communal groups, never forming the deep familial bond central to Vexari development. He described how young Vexari typically underwent a ritual of genetic affirmation, where their lineage was celebrated and recorded in the collective memory banks. He had been denied this right. "My genetic legacy is problematic," he explained, his usually precise language turning vague. "My parents were researchers on a vessel that encountered difficulties. I survived. They did not." "I'm sorry," Talia said sincerely. "It was long ago," he replied, though his frills drooped slightly. "The creche masters who raised me were not cruel, merely distant. They fulfilled their obligation to ensure my physical development. But not your emotional needs," Talia observed. Krell's compound eyes fixed on her with sudden intensity. "Humans place excessive importance on individual emotional satisfaction. Perhaps," she acknowledged. "Or perhaps the Vexari undervalue it." Over the next few weeks, their interactions became routine. Talia justified their meetings to her superiors as cultural exchange beneficial to human Vexari relations. Privately, she found herself increasingly troubled by the subtle ways Krell had adapted to his outcast status, the careful distance he maintained from others, the deferential postures, the habit of speaking only when directly addressed. In her laboratory, Talia received permission to sequence Krell's genome as part of a comparative study. What she found left her staring at her monitor in confusion long after her shift ended. "This can't be right," she muttered to herself, comparing his genetic profile against standard Vexari markers. Certain sequences appeared almost artificially structured, with symmetry patterns unlike anything in recorded vexillary biology. More puzzling were gene expressions that didn't match any known function in vexillary physiology. When she subtly questioned Krell about medical examinations in his past, his responses were uncharacteristically evasive. "We do not discuss physical imperfections," he told her. "It is improper." That evening, using her research clearance, Talia accessed deeper medical archives. What she found was a series of classified medical reports on Krell, dating back to his childhood. Most content was redacted, but one phrase appeared repeatedly: anomalous xenogenetic integration. Her research terminal suddenly shut down, screen flashing with a security protocol message. Seconds later, her communication device pinged with a message from Station Security Chief Marcus Wolf: "Dr. Reeves, please report to my office at 0800 tomorrow regarding unauthorized access to restricted files." Talia felt a flutter of anxiety but also determination. She was onto something important, something that might explain why Krell had spent his life as an outcast. Whatever secret the vexillary were protecting, it was significant enough to warrant active surveillance of her research. That night, she made an encrypted copy of the genetic anomalies she'd identified. Whatever happened in tomorrow's meeting, she wouldn't abandon her investigation now. Somewhere in Krell's DNA lay answers that someone didn't want found, answers that might finally allow him to understand why his own people treated him as untouchable. And perhaps, she thought as she secured her data, answers that could change the nature of human vexillary relations forever. Security Chief Marcus Wolf's office was deliberately intimidating, windowless, minimally furnished, with stark lighting that left no shadows. The man himself matched his environment, precise, unyielding, with eyes that missed nothing. "Dr. Reeves," he began without preamble, "you accessed Level 4 restricted files on vexillary subject KRL 937. His name is Krell," Talia corrected automatically. "And yes, I did. As part of my ongoing xenobiological research." Research that was explicitly limited to current physiological data, Wolf countered, sliding a tablet across his desk. "Your clearance doesn't extend to historical medical records or classified incident reports." Talia maintained a composed expression. "Chief Wolf, I discovered significant anomalies in Krell's genetic structure. Understanding their origin is vital to my research." "Your research," Wolf said flatly, "doesn't supersede diplomatic protocols established with the vexillary High Command. Ambassador Trell has personally expressed concern about your interactions with the subject. They're monitoring my personal conversations now." Talia felt indignation rising. "On what authority?" "On the authority of the treaty that allows this station to exist," Wolf replied, his voice softening slightly. "Look, Dr. Reeves, I understand scientific curiosity. But there are larger considerations here. The vexillary are intensely private about certain aspects of their biology and social structure. Private enough to condemn one of their own to lifelong isolation," she challenged. Wolf sighed. "It's not our place to question their cultural practices. Your access to vexillary biological databases is suspended for 2 weeks. Consider it a warning." He leveled a serious gaze at her. "And I'd strongly advise limiting your contact with KRL 937. As Talia left Wolf's office, frustration churned within her. The suspension was inconvenient but not insurmountable. She still had her encrypted copy of Krell's anomalous genetic markers, and more importantly, she had a new lead, the mention of classified incident reports. She found Krell in the hydroponics bay, tending to experimental plants designed to process vexillary atmospheric preferences. His dexterous fingers moved with surprising gentleness among the delicate seedlings. "Your security chief believes I am a negative influence on you," Krell stated without looking up, his translator converting the subtle harmonics of his native speech. Talia blinked in surprise. "How did you?" "Vexillary hearing is more acute than humans realize," he explained. "Also, news travels quickly when it concerns an Urvik. I've been warned to stay away from you, she admitted, moving closer to inspect a phosphorescent fern. That would be wise, Krell agreed, his head frills lying flat against his skull. I have caused you professional difficulty. You haven't caused anything, Talia countered firmly. And I make my own decisions about who deserves my time. She hesitated before asking, Krell, what happened to your parents? What was the research vessel they served on? His movement stilled, compound eyes swiveling to focus on her. The distant horizon. It was lost during deep space exploration beyond the Cygnus reach. I was very young. And you were the only survivor, she pressed gently. Yes. His reply was clipped, uncharacteristically brusque. It is not discussed. Later that evening, Talia used her personal terminal to contact an old Academy friend, Jonah Whittaker, now stationed at Earth's Central Archives. Their conversation, conducted through encrypted channels, was brief and carefully worded. Looking for information on an incident involving a Vexery vessel called Distant Horizon, she explained. Approximately 20 Earth years ago. Jonah's expression remained neutral. That would be classified under the First Contact Accords. I know, she acknowledged. But it's important, Jonah. It might help someone who's suffered needlessly. His sigh was almost inaudible. Give me 3 days. The waiting period tested Talia's patience. She maintained her regular duties while deliberately creating opportunities to interact with Krell. Each conversation revealed small details about his isolated existence, how he'd taught himself human languages beyond what the translators provided, how he observed Vexery social rituals from a distance, memorizing interactions he was never permitted to join. Why stay among them, she asked one evening as they observed distant stars from the observatory deck. There are human outposts that would welcome your technical skills without prejudice. Because I am Vexery, he answered simply. Despite their rejection, I belong to this species. To understand why I am different, I must remain close to what I should have been. Jonah's data packet arrived precisely 3 days later, heavily encrypted and bearing only his terse message, be careful with this. Official records say this vessel was lost to drive malfunction. What Talia found in the files made her blood run cold. The distant horizon hadn't simply been lost. It had been quarantined, then deliberately destroyed by Vexery authorities after reporting a containment breach in its xenobiology lab. The ship's final transmissions included fragmented references to successful genetic integration and evolutionary advancement potential. Most telling was a classified addendum noting that a single survivor, an infant, had been recovered and placed under permanent observation due to irreversible genetic contamination. Talia checked the dates against Krell's records. They aligned perfectly. Whatever experiment his parents had been conducting, he was its living result. The question remained, what exactly had they integrated into their child's genetic code that terrified the Vexery enough to destroy all evidence and isolate the sole survivor? The answer came from an unexpected source. During her next shift, Talia found Dr. Hiroshi Takahashi, the station's eldest xenobiologist, waiting in her laboratory. You've been asking dangerous questions, Dr. Reeves, the old scientist said without greeting. Questions that could unravel 20 years of carefully maintained diplomatic fiction. You know about Krell, she realized. Hiroshi nodded gravely. I was part of the human scientific delegation that witnessed the aftermath of the Distant Horizon incident. What I'm about to tell you isn't in any database. He glanced nervously at the door. The Vexery aren't just being cruel or superstitious about Krell's condition. They're afraid of him, of what he represents. Which is what? Talia pressed. Hiroshi's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. A bridge between species that was never meant to exist. The forbidden truth that could upend everything we understand about interspecies relations. Talia stared at Dr. Hiroshi, her mind racing to process his cryptic statement. What do you mean, a bridge between species? The elderly scientist glanced nervously at her laboratory door before continuing. The official history taught to humans about the Vexari is incomplete. Before we encountered them 23 years ago, they had fought a centuries-long war with another species, the Navari. I've never heard of them, Talia said. Because they supposedly no longer exist, Hiroshi replied grimly. The Vexari claim the Navari were eradicated in the final conflict, their homeworld rendered uninhabitable. It's presented as ancient history, a regrettable chapter in their past that they've moved beyond. Talia frowned. What does this have to do with Krell? The Navari weren't completely destroyed, Hiroshi continued. Some were captured for study. The Vexari have always been fascinated by genetic science, it's the foundation of their social hierarchy. Krell's parents were leading geneticists investigating whether Navari adaptive capabilities could be integrated into Vexari physiology. The realization hit Talia like a physical blow. Are you saying Krell is part Navari? That his parents experimented on their own child? Not exactly, Hiroshi shook his head. From what I understand, they believed they were working with dormant genetic sequences, harmless research. But something activated during gestation. When Krell was born, they discovered the Navari genes weren't just present, they were actively expressing. So the Vexari quarantined the ship and destroyed it, Talia said, horror spreading through her. Along with everyone who knew the truth, except an infant who couldn't speak. The Vexari High Command couldn't execute a child, even their moral code has limits. But they couldn't accept him either, Hiroshi explained. The Navari conflict shaped their entire civilization. To them, Krell represents both a taboo and a dangerous possibility, that their sworn enemies weren't so different after all, that the species could be compatible. Talia sat heavily in her chair, processing the implications. That's why they call him Ervik, untouchable. He's living proof of their greatest scientific achievement and their greatest shame. Precisely, Hiroshi nodded. His extended lifespan, his enhanced cognitive abilities, these are Navari traits. The very qualities that make him exceptional are why he cannot be accepted. Does Krell know? Talia asked. I doubt it. The Vexari would never tell him, and humans were sworn to secrecy as part of the peace accords. Hiroshi's weathered face showed genuine concern. Talia, you must understand, revealing this knowledge doesn't just risk your career. It could destabilize relations between our species. So we perpetuate a lie that condemns him to lifelong isolation, she challenged. That's not science or diplomacy, it's cruelty. The Vexari would argue its necessity, Hiroshi replied. Their society is built on genetic purity. The concept that they share compatible DNA with a species they spent centuries trying to eradicate is politically inconvenient. After Hiroshi left, Talia remained in her laboratory, ethical dilemmas warring within her. As a scientist, she believed in truth above all else. As a human among aliens, she understood the fragility of interspecies relations. And as someone who had grown increasingly close to Krell, she couldn't bear his continued suffering based on a diplomatic fiction. She made her decision that evening, requesting a private meeting with Krell in the station's arboretum, one of the few places without constant surveillance. When he arrived, his normally fluid movements seemed hesitant. Your message sounded urgent, Dr. Reeves. Talia, she corrected gently. After what I'm about to tell you, I think we're beyond professional titles. Carefully, methodically, she explained everything she had discovered, the true fate of the distant horizon, his parents' research, and the Navari genetic sequences he carried. As she spoke, Krell's head frills alternately flared and flattened, the only visible indication of his emotional turmoil. When she finished, silence stretched between them. Finally, he spoke, his translator struggling to convey the complex harmonics of his voice. I have suspected something like this, he admitted. My physiological differences were too significant to be mere mutation. But the Navari. his compound eyes fixed on a distant point. We are taught they were monsters. Aggressors who threatened Vexery existence. History is written by the victors, Talia said softly. And fear often masks itself as hatred. If what you say is true, I am neither fully Vexery nor Navari, Krell observed with remarkable calm. I exist between worlds. You exist as yourself, Talia countered firmly. Your genetic makeup doesn't define your worth or your right to be treated with dignity. Krell's gaze returned to her, studying her face with new intensity. Why have you done this, Talia? You've risked your position, possibly your future on this station. Because it was right, she answered simply. And because. She hesitated, suddenly uncertain how to express the complex emotions that had developed during their time together. Because I care what happens to you. The admission hung in the air between them, a different kind of truth, equally dangerous in its implications. Before he could respond, her communication device chimed with an urgent alert. Security Chief Wolf's message was terse. Your quarters and laboratory have been searched under diplomatic authority. Report immediately to Conference Room Alpha. Krell's reaction was immediate, his posture straightening with sudden resolve. They know what you've discovered. Probably, Talia acknowledged, a cold knot forming in her stomach. I should go alone. This is my decision, my responsibility. No, Krell said firmly, a new resonance in his voice that her translator struggled to interpret. For too long, others have decided my fate without my participation. If this concerns my existence, I will face it directly. As they moved through the station's corridors toward the impending confrontation, Talia realized something had fundamentally changed. Krell walked differently, no longer deferential, no longer keeping the customary distance from others. Whatever happened next, the truth had already begun its work. In the moment before they entered the conference room, where representatives of both species awaited them, Krell's hand briefly touched hers, an unprecedented gesture from a Vexery to a human. Whatever consequences come, he said quietly, know that you have given me something no one else ever has. What's that? She asked. The truth of my existence, he replied. And with it, the possibility of a future beyond isolation. The door slid open, revealing Ambassador Trell, Commander Park, and Security Chief Wolf seated around the conference table. Their expressions ranged from diplomatic neutrality to undisguised concern. Dr. Reeves, the ambassador began, his translator rendering his harmonics in formal tones, you have accessed restricted information in violation of the third protocol. Yes, Talia acknowledged, her voice steady. Information that should never have been restricted in the first place. The conference room crackled with tension as Ambassador Trell's head frills flared in what Talia now recognized as alarmed indignation. You have violated not merely station protocols, Dr. Reeves, but the fundamental diplomatic compact between our species, the ambassador stated, his translator unable to fully capture the harmonics of disapproval in his natural voice. With respect, Ambassador, Talia replied, standing her ground, that compact was built on deliberate suppression of scientific truth. Commander Park raised a placating hand. Dr. Reeves, this isn't the appropriate forum for. It is precisely the appropriate forum, Krell interrupted, his normally deferential posture conspicuously absent. For 20 Earth years, I have lived as an outcast without understanding why. I have endured isolation, performed menial duties despite my capabilities, and accepted my status as Ervik because I believed it was the natural order. Ambassador Trell's compound eyes swiveled to focus solely on Krell, deliberately excluding the humans present, a significant cultural insult. You forget your place, KRL 937. This matter concerns diplomatic relations between established species. My existence is diplomacy, Krell responded with unexpected eloquence. I embody the biological reality you have spent centuries denying, that Vexery and Navari share compatible genetic structures. The ambassador's frills flattened completely, a sign of severe distress that Talia had never witnessed before. The human has filled your mind with dangerous speculation. The Navari were eradicated for their aggression against our civilization. Were they? Talia challenged, sliding a data tablet across the conference table. Because according to historical records I've obtained, the conflict began when Vexari scientific vessels began harvesting Navari biological materials without consent. The aggression came after years of what the Navari considered genetic theft. Security Chief Wolf reached for the tablet, his expression grim. Dr. Reeves, possession of classified historical documents. Is irrelevant now, Commander Park interjected, surprising everyone. He stood, addressing Ambassador Trell directly. Ambassador, I've served on this station for 7 years. In that time, I've respected Vexari customs, including the treatment of Krell. But Dr. Reeves has uncovered information that can't be dismissed as mere diplomatic inconvenience. What would you have us do? The ambassador demanded. Acknowledge that our species committed historical wrongs? That we maintain uncomfortable truths about genetic compatibility? Such admissions would destabilize our entire social structure. Perhaps it needs destabilizing, Talia suggested quietly. No society built on deliberate falsehood can truly advance. Krell moved forward, placing himself physically between Talia and the ambassador, a gesture of protection that shocked the Vexari diplomat into momentary silence. I do not wish to destroy what we have built, Krell said with careful modulation. But I can no longer live as less than what I am. Dar. Reeves has shown me that understanding one's nature is the first step toward acceptance. Commander Park studied the tableau before him, decades of diplomatic experience evident in his measured response. I propose a compromise. The historical record remains classified for now, but Krell's status is officially reconsidered. He receives appropriate position and recognition based on his abilities, not his origins. And his genetic makeup? Ambassador Trell demanded. Becomes a research opportunity rather than a source of shame, Talia replied firmly. The Navari adaptability genes he carries could revolutionize space medicine, environmental adaptation, countless fields. The negotiation continued for hours, diplomatic language masking the profound shift occurring in real time. By its conclusion, Ambassador Trell had conceded more than anyone expected. Krell would be granted senior research status, his genetic structure would be studied openly as a unique evolutionary development, and most significantly, the prohibition against his full participation in Vexari society would be lifted. As they finally left the conference room, exhaustion and elation mingled in Talia's expression. It's not complete vindication, she acknowledged, but it's a beginning. A beginning I never thought possible, Krell replied, his normally muted coloration showing hints of the vibrant blues that characterized contented Vexari. You risked everything for this truth. Not everything, she smiled. My position was sanctioned but preserved. Apparently, Commander Park argued that my ethical stubbornness was a valuable counterbalance to diplomatic expediency. In the months that followed, subtle but significant changes rippled through Arcturus Station. Krell assumed leadership of a new xenobiology initiative focused on adaptive genetics. Other Vexari, initially hesitant, gradually began including him in professional and social circles. The rigid distance once maintained around him slowly dissolved, replaced by cautious curiosity. More personally, his relationship with Talia evolved beyond professional collaboration. Their frequent meetings drew attention, some speculative, some disapproving, but neither retreated from the connection forming between them. One evening, as they worked late in the research laboratory, Krell addressed the unspoken question between them. Among Vexari, genetic compatibility is the foundation of all bonding, he said, his attention seemingly focused on the cellular analysis before him. It determines social position, professional advancement, and potential mates. By those standards, I remain unsuitable for anyone. Talia looked up from her data models. Humans have different standards. I've noticed, he replied, a harmonic in his voice that her translator rendered as gentle humor. You value compatibility of mind and purpose above genetic alignment. Among other things, she agreed, holding his gaze steadily. The station crew has begun using a term when they see us together, Krell observed. Star-crossed. My translator provides multiple interpretations, none entirely satisfactory. It's from old Earth literature, Talia explained. It refers to people whose relationship faces obstacles from the world around them. Is that what we have? A relationship? The directness of his question belied the careful way Vexery typically approached personal matters. I think we've had one since I first broke protocol to speak with you, she answered with equal directness. The question is what kind it will become. Krell's head frills rippled in a pattern she had come to recognize as thoughtfulness. Among my people, such matters would be decided by genetic counselors and family elders. I have neither. Among my people, Talia countered, moving closer, individuals decide for themselves. 6 months later, Ambassador Trell faced his most challenging diplomatic communication yet, explaining to the Vexery High Command why a senior xenobiologist had formally registered a pair bond with the being they had once declared Ervik. His carefully worded message described it as an unexpected cultural exchange opportunity with significant scientific applications. The High Command's response was terse but revolutionary: the union will be observed with interest. The offspring, should they exist, will provide valuable data on interspecies genetic expression. When Talia showed the message to Krell in their newly shared quarters, his reaction surprised her: genuine laughter, a sound she had never heard from any Vexery. They cannot help themselves, he explained, amusement evident in his harmonics. Even in accepting the unprecedented, they frame it as scientific inquiry. Is that so different from how we began? She asked, settling beside him to watch the stars through their viewport. Perhaps not, he acknowledged, his hand finding hers in a gesture that had once seemed impossible. But what began as inquiry has become something neither of our species anticipated. Beyond their window, the vastness of space stretched infinite with possibility, much like the future they had created, a future where understanding could overcome prejudice, where truth could dismantle centuries of separation, and where two beings from different worlds could forge connection despite every obstacle. For Krell, once the untouchable Orphan, and Talia, the human who had uncovered hidden truth, their union represented more than personal happiness. It stood as living proof that the barriers between species were more permeable than anyone had imagined, and that sometimes, the most profound discoveries came not from laboratories or diplomatic chambers, but from the simple courage to see beyond established boundaries.